Imagine waking up tomorrow to find that every dollar in your bank account is now worth 75 cents. Your mortgage hasn't changed. Your student loans haven't changed. But the money you worked for, it's been sliced down by an invisible hand, and there's nothing you can do about it. This actually happened repeatedly throughout medieval Europe. Kings didn't need printing presses or Federal Reserve meetings. They had something far more elegant and far more ruthless. Welcome back to Forgotten Finance, where lost money lessons come back to life. In 1303, King Philip IV of France faced a problem that would sound familiar to any modern politician. He was drowning in debt. Wars with England and Flanders had drained his treasury. His solution wasn't raising taxes or cutting spending. Instead, he called in every gold and silver coin in his kingdom, melted them down, mixed in cheap metals, and reissued new coins with the same face value. Overnight, a coin that was once pure silver became half silver, half copper. But you still had to treat it like it was worth a full silver coin when paying the king's taxes. Philip pocketed the difference. His subjects called him Philip the Fair, but there was nothing fair about what he'd done to their savings. This wasn't some primitive mistake or medieval ignorance. It was a calculated financial strategy called debasement, and it was the inflation engine of the Middle Ages. While we worry about the Fed's interest rate decisions, medieval merchants worried about whether their king would summon them to the mint next month and turn their wealth into worthless metal. Here's how the con worked in practice. A king would announce he was improving the coinage, modernizing it, making it more convenient. Citizens were required by law to bring their old coins to the royal mint. The mint would melt down a pound of pure silver coins and recast it into coins that were only 3/4 silver and 1/4 copper or tin. But here's the trick. Those new coins still bore the same official value. If you brought in 10 silver shillings, you might get back 10 shillings in the new currency. But those new shillings contained only 7.5 shillings worth of actual silver. The king kept the difference. He just taxed his entire kingdom without calling it a tax. The economic devastation rippled outward, like a stone thrown into a pond. Merchants who had extended credit found themselves repaid in debased currency worth a fraction of what they'd lent. Workers who'd saved for years watched their nest eggs evaporate. International trade became a nightmare as foreign merchants demanded payment in old, trustworthy coins, or hiked their prices to compensate for the garbage currency they were being offered. The Hanseatic League, that powerful network of merchant guilds in Northern Europe, kept detailed records of which kingdoms had reliable money and which didn't. Getting a reputation for bad currency could lock you out of international trade entirely. But the kings had their justifications, and some of them sound eerily modern. War was expensive. Edward I of England spent over £1 million fighting in Wales, Scotland, and France, at a time when the entire annual revenue of the English crown was maybe £50,000. Where was that money supposed to come from? Medieval taxation systems were primitive. You couldn't just implement a progressive income tax. The nobility would rebel if you tried to tax them too heavily, and the peasants barely had anything to take. Debasement was the closest thing medieval monarchs had to quantitative easing. Some rulers even convinced themselves they were doing good. In their minds, having more coins in circulation, even if each individual coin was worth less, would stimulate trade and make everyone richer. Sound familiar? It's the exact same argument modern governments make when they expand the money supply. And just like today, it worked in the very short term and created disasters in the long term. The human cost of these policies shows up in chronicle after chronicle. In 1351, England passed the Statute of Laborers, trying to freeze wages after the Black Death had killed so many workers that survivors could demand higher pay. But the statute set wages in nominal terms, in the actual number of coins, without accounting for the fact that those coins had been debased multiple times. Workers were legally forbidden from demanding enough debased coins to equal what they'd earned before in good coins. The law effectively used currency manipulation to suppress wages. France under Philip IV saw riots and rebellions. The debasement was so severe and so frequent that chroniclers of the era wrote with genuine anguish about how the poor were crushed and how merchants were going bankrupt. Philip debased the currency at least 24 times during his reign. That's once every year and a half on average. Imagine trying to run a business, plan for retirement or save for your children's future when the value of money changed every 18 months. But here's where it gets really interesting. Medieval people weren't stupid. They figured out hedges and workarounds that would make a modern financial advisor proud. Merchants started writing contracts in ghost money, theoretical units of account based on the old good coins that no longer existed. They'd say you owe me 10 pounds in old sterling or in marks of Cologne, reference currencies that couldn't be debased because they weren't actually circulating anymore. It was a way to protect yourself from your own king. People also hoarded good coins and spent bad ones, exactly as Gresham's law would later predict. If you had an old coin with high silver content and a new debased coin with the same face value, you'd spend the debased coin and hide the good one. This meant the worst money drove the best money out of circulation, making the problem even worse. Kings would then have to debase even further to get the same revenue, creating a vicious cycle. Some kingdoms broke the cycle and became economic powerhouses because of it. The Florentine florin, first minted in 1252, maintained its weight and purity for centuries. It became the dollar of medieval Europe, accepted everywhere, trusted by everyone. Florence grew incredibly wealthy, partly because its currency was sound. Merchants would rather deal in florins than in the constantly shifting currencies of France or England. Venice's ducat had the same reputation. These cities understood something many kings didn't. Trust is more valuable than the short-term gain from debasement. The parallels to our modern era are impossible to ignore. We don't melt down coins anymore, but when the Federal Reserve expands the money supply, or when governments run the printing presses, the mechanism is different, but the effect is similar. Your savings lose purchasing power. Your wages don't keep up. The people closest to the money creation, whether medieval mints or modern banks, benefit first, while everyone else pays the price later. Medieval currency manipulation teaches us that monetary debasement is one of the oldest tricks in the government playbook. It's seductive because it feels free, like you're creating value out of thin air. But you're not creating value, you're redistributing it, silently, from everyone who holds the currency to whoever controls its creation. The medieval peasant who watched his savings become worthless and the modern worker who watches inflation eat their paycheck are experiencing the same phenomenon, separated by 8 centuries but connected by the same fundamental con. The next time someone tells you that inflation is complicated, that monetary policy requires sophisticated PhD economists to understand, remember Philip the Fair melting down his kingdom's coins. The technology changes, the mathematics get more complex, but the basic theft? That's remained remarkably consistent since 1303.